Here are the topics that will be covered in the Congress revision videos. This video will focus on representation in Congress and how voting in Congress works. The third function of Congress is representation. The first thing that needs to be addressed is the fact that representation can be used in two different ways. Earlier in the video, we saw the composition of Congress, and we saw that Congress is not always representative of America in terms of race or gender. This is to use the term representative in terms of who presents the electorate. The second meaning of representation, and the main meaning for this part of the video, is in terms of how legislators represent their constituents. There are two contrasting models of representation, the delegate model or the trustee model. Under the delegate model, constituents elect their representatives as delegates for their constituency. Essentially, the representative acts as the voice of those who are not present. They exercise little or any private judgment, whereas under the trustee model, the representative acts as the person who is vested with formal responsibility for the affairs of others. Such representation is based upon the considered judgment of the legislator. The elected representative is trusted to make the right judgment. This tends to be how most members of Congress see their role. Some critique this as being overly elitist. When looking at the Senate versus the House of Representatives in terms of who is more representative of their constituents, congressmen do take their representative roles more seriously. They are residents of the state that they represent. Most House representatives reside in their congressional district. House members in particular are careful about constituents' views because they have to face the electors every 2 years. However, it is important to consider that senators are also from their state, just like a House of Representatives. However, they just aren't as dependent on their constituents in terms of re-election. There are various ways a member of Congress can find out the views of their constituents. Whilst in Washington, D.C., members of Congress can keep in touch via phone, email, and nowadays Twitter. They can also read the newspaper from their constituents, as well as make regular visits back home. Once back home, a member of Congress can engage in a variety of different engagements, such as holding party and town hall meetings, conducting surgeries with individual constituents, making visits around the state or district, appearing on local radio phone-in programs, interviews with representatives of the local media, addressing groups such as chambers of commerce, professional groups and charity lunches, visiting local schools, hospitals and businesses. All of this is to ensure that a member of Congress is aware of the needs and desires of his constituents. Members of Congress also have to fulfill their representative role, which they can do through various different ways. They can vote on the legislation on the floor of their chamber, membership of standing committees of particular interest in their constituents. For example, North Dakota's senators, which are Republican and Democrat, they are both members of the Senate Agriculture Committee, as this is very important to their state. They can also lobby executive departments and agencies on relevant policies. They can perform constituency casework by helping constituents with all kinds of federal matters, such as student loans, passports and visa issues, as well as the receipt of federal benefits. They can also try to gain money in projects to benefit their states or districts. This is called pork barrel politics. Let's look at pork barrel politics in more detail. Pork barrel politics is where funds are provided for projects in a member of the Congress's state or districts. The spending is intended to benefit constituents of a politician in return for their political support, either in the form of campaign contributions or votes. Here are two famous examples of pork barrel politics. One of the most famous alleged pork barrel projects was the Big Dig in Boston, Massachusetts. The Big Dig was a project to take an existing 3.5-mile interstate highway and relocate it underground. It ended up costing the US $14.6 billion, or over $4 billion per mile. Tip O'Neill, after whom one of the Big Dig tunnels was named, pushed to have the Big Dig funded by the federal government while he was Speaker of the House of Representatives. Another case is during the 2008 US presidential elections. The Grosvenor Island Bridge, also known as the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska, is cited as an example of pork barrel spending. The bridge, pushed for by Republican Senator Ted Stevens, was projected to cost $398 million and would connect the island's 50 residents to the Chechnya International Airport in Rigovago Island and Chechnya. One of the ways in which members of Congress fulfill their representative function is in the votes that they cast on the House or Senate floor. There are 6 factors to consider in terms of what can influence how a member of Congress might vote. We have already looked at the constituents previously, so in this part of the video we are going to focus on the other 5 factors, those being political party, the administration, pressure groups, colleagues and staff, and personal belief. Pause the video here and see if you can fill out the spider diagram on what the other factors are and how they might influence a member of Congress. It is worth noting that more than one factor can influence how a member of Congress votes. Political party is one of the number of factors that determine the voting in Congress. For some members, on some issues, it may be the single most important reason. A party unity vote, or simply put, a party vote, sometimes occurs in Congress when the issue is contentious, or it could be an ideological matter, such as civil liberties, taxation, gun control, abortion, or school prayers. An example of a party unity vote would be in 2016 when the Federal Information Systems Safeguard Act, which concerns the establishment of government operations and personnel laws concerning the security of federal information, went through the House floor. 241 voted for the bill and 181 voted against. When this is broken down into party lines, 237 Republicans voted for the bill and only 2 against. Contrast this with the Democrats, where only 4 voted for the bill and 179 voted against. Parties have a few tricks to encourage party voting called sticks and carrots. Sticks are punishments for those who do not vote along party lines. However, the main stick, which is the threat of deselection, often doesn't work in this system because voters decide on the candidate in the primary elections. Carrots are incentives such as in giving executive branch posts. However, this also doesn't work in a system of separation powers. In 2010, the Senate recorded its highest percentage of party votes in over half a century, 78.6%, and the following year the House of Representatives recorded its highest ever percentage of party votes at 75.8%. In 2013, both houses recorded party voting in just under 70% of all recorded votes. This shows that party cohesion has increased significantly since 2002. It is important to remember, however, that party labels do not necessarily mean voting together. Conservative Democrats like Congressman Jim Cooper of Tennessee and Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota often vote with Republicans. Although ideological spread within each party is not as widespread within each party as it used to be, both parties in both houses do still include both ideological and more centrist members. The term administration refers to the members of the executive branch, including the president. Much legislation is voted on in Congress is initiated by the president. Cabinet members have a keen interest in the passage of legislation as it affects their policy areas. So when members of the administration keep in touch with members of Congress through phone calls, as well as in meetings, in an attempt to persuade them to cast their votes in a certain way. Any persuasion needs to be regular, reciprocal, and bipartisan. It is important that members of Congress are approached not only before an important vote, but at all times. It is important that those departments and the White House are willing to do favours in return. All this needs to be done with members of both parties. For administration to talk only with members of their own party, this would usually be a recipe for disaster. Pressure groups use a number of ways to try and influence a vote. They try and influence members and votes with direct contact with members. They also attempt to generate public support, make phone calls and visits to Congress, provide evidence to standing committees, organise rallies, demonstrations and petitions, and fundraising and campaigning to support candidates who share their views and try and defeat those who don't. Certain policy areas have seen significant pressure group activities in recent years, including the environment, abortion, gun control, healthcare and welfare reform. Colleagues and staff are another factor that can influence a vote because of the huge numbers of votes that members of Congress have to cast. They cannot personally know the details of all of them. Therefore, they rely on others to help them make these decisions. A congressman might turn to a fellow congressman of the same chamber and of the same party who share the same philosophy and views. Some senior members act as mentors to newer members, offering advice and suggestion on votes. On certain votes, House or Senate members may vote according to their own personal beliefs. Issues such as abortion, capital punishment, taxation, Federal subsidies and defence spending are likely to bring a member's personal philosophy to the fore. There are, for example, some members of Congress who will never vote for a federal subsidy to any industry or group, while others will never vote to deny life to a fellow human being, whether it be through capital punishment or through war.